Ethan's blindfolded hand closed around Olivia's wrist, and his smile appeared before anyone said her name. 3 minutes earlier, the ballroom had been bright with candlelight and camera flashes, the polished oak floor gleaming beneath rows of ivory chairs. A string quartet played near the arched windows, their bows whispering over the music while servers moved between tables carrying champagne that smelled faintly of pear. Claire Bennett stood beneath a canopy of white roses in a fitted satin gown, the fabric cool against her arms, watching her fiancé laugh as his best man tied a black silk blindfold over his eyes. "No peeking," someone called. Ethan Walker lifted both hands in surrender, his gold cuff links catching the warm light. The guests laughed. Claire did too, though her fingers tightened around the stem of her champagne flute when Olivia Hayes stepped into the circle. The game had been Olivia's idea. A harmless wedding challenge, she had called it. Ethan would be blindfolded while several women from the bridal party stood in front of him, and he would try to identify Claire by touching only their hands. The room smelled of roses, wax, and expensive perfume. Somewhere behind Claire, a spoon struck a glass, followed by another burst of laughter. "This should be easy," Olivia said, smoothing the pale blue silk at her waist. Her voice was light, but she did not look at Claire. Claire watched Ethan instead. He tilted his head toward the sound. Not dramatically, barely an inch. Yet the movement was precise, as if her best friend's voice had reached him through all the music and conversation and landed somewhere familiar. The bridesmaids formed a line. Claire stood third. Olivia stood last. Ethan touched the first woman's hand, ran his thumb once across her knuckles, and shook his head. The guests cheered. With the second, he hesitated, then laughed when she deliberately squeezed his fingers. When he reached Claire, the room quieted. His palm covered hers. The silk ribbon hid his eyes, but Claire could see the concentration in the set of his mouth. He traced the edge of her engagement ring, brushed his thumb along the side of her finger, then said, "Claire." Applause rose beneath the chandeliers. Claire released the breath trapped behind her ribs. Ethan pulled her closer by the hand, and she kissed his cheek. His skin was warm. The applause softened into murmurs as Claire returned to her place. The game should have ended there. Instead, Olivia stepped forward. "One more," she said. A few guests clapped. Someone whistled. The quartet had stopped, leaving only the hum of the air conditioning and the faint clink of ice inside glasses. Ethan held out his hand. Olivia placed hers in it. He did not test her fingers the way he had tested the others. He did not search for a ring or trace the shape of her nails. His hand moved directly to the inside of her wrist, where her pulse beat beneath the skin. Then his thumb slid once across the narrow scar near her palm. Ethan smiled. It was not the uncertain grin he had worn during the game. It was immediate, private, familiar. "Olivia," he said. The laughter that followed was loud, but uneven. Claire did not join it. She watched Olivia pull her hand away too quickly, the blue silk of her dress rustling against the wooden floor. Ethan reached for the blindfold, still smiling. "Lucky guess," Olivia said. Claire looked down at her champagne. A crescent-shaped crack had appeared near the rim where her grip had tightened. When she looked up again, Ethan and Olivia were avoiding each other's eyes with the careful precision of people who had practiced doing exactly that. The applause dissolved into scattered conversations, but Claire did not return to the center of the ballroom. She set the cracked champagne flute onto a silver tray with a soft click, the crystal wobbling once before settling. A waiter reached for it, hesitated when he noticed the fractured rim, then silently replaced it with a fresh glass. Claire left the untouched champagne behind and walked toward the bridal suite, her satin train whispering over the polished floor. The cool air from the hallway brushed against her bare shoulders, replacing the warmth of the crowded reception room with the faint scent of fresh lilies and polished cedar. Behind her, laughter swelled again as the quartet resumed, playing, covering the awkward silence that had followed Ethan's impossible recognition. Inside the bridal suite, warm vanity lights reflected from oversized mirrors framed in brushed brass. Claire stood before the glass and removed a loose strand of hair from her necklace, but her hand stopped when the door opened. Olivia stepped inside, carrying the bouquet they had picked together only 3 days earlier. White peonies, pale eucalyptus, and tiny sprays of baby's breath filled the room with their sweet fragrance. "Everyone's waiting," Olivia said, forcing an easy smile. Claire accepted the bouquet without looking away from the mirror. "How long have you had that scar?" she asked quietly. Olivia's fingers curled against the fabric of her dress. "What scar?" Claire turned. "The one on your palm." Ethan found it immediately. Olivia gave a quick laugh that echoed too sharply against the marble floor. "It was just luck." "Was it?" Claire stepped closer, the bouquet resting between them. He didn't search. He knew exactly where to touch. Before Olivia answered, another knock interrupted them. Ethan entered, already free of the blindfold, adjusting the cuff of his tuxedo. The scent of his cedar cologne drifted into the room with him. "There you two are," he said. "The officiant wants us ready in 5 minutes." His eyes landed on Claire first, then flickered toward Olivia for the briefest moment. It lasted less than a heartbeat, but Olivia answered it with the smallest nod before looking away. Claire watched the exchange in the mirror rather than facing them directly. Reflections were harder to rehearse. Ethan walked over and reached for Claire's hand. She let him take it, but before his fingers closed completely, she pulled away and placed the bouquet into his hands instead. White petals brushed against the black wool of his tuxedo. "Hold this," she said. He blinked. "What?" "Hold it." Ethan did. The stems left tiny droplets of water on his cuff. Claire stepped toward Olivia and extended her own hand. "Humor me." Olivia frowned. "About what?" "Touch my hand the way Ethan touched yours." The room became so still that even the muted music outside seemed distant. Olivia reluctantly placed her fingertips against Claire's palm. The contact was uncertain, searching, unfamiliar. Claire waited several seconds before withdrawing. She turned to Ethan. "Now you." Ethan looked from one woman to the other. "Claire, people are waiting." "I know." Her voice remained calm. "Touch my hand with your eyes open." He laughed softly, hoping to dissolve the tension. "You're making too much out of a party game." "Then prove it." Ethan set the bouquet onto the vanity. His hand met Claire's. This time his thumb wandered across her fingers before finding the engagement ring. He hesitated. Only then did he settle into the grip he had used moments earlier. Claire slowly lowered her hand. The silence in the room had changed. It no longer belonged to confusion. It belonged to comparison. Outside, someone called that the ceremony would begin in exactly 2 minutes. Claire looked directly at Ethan and spoke before either of them could move. "Before I walk down that aisle, I want the truth from both of you. Right now." Edit neither Ethan nor Olivia answered. The silence stretched just long enough for the church bells outside to strike the quarter hour, each note vibrating faintly through the walls of the bridal suite. The bouquet rested on the vanity, a few white petals drifting onto the polished marble where tiny beads of water caught the glow of the vanity lights. Ethan cleared his throat first. "Claire, this is getting out of hand." His voice remained steady, but he straightened the cuff of his tuxedo for the second time in less than a minute. Olivia folded her arms, then immediately unfolded them, smoothing invisible wrinkles from the blue satin at her waist. "Nothing happened," she said. "He guessed correctly once. That's all." Claire studied neither face. Instead, she picked up the bouquet and quietly removed a single eucalyptus stem that had slipped loose from the ribbon. She rolled it between her fingers, releasing its clean, cool scent into the room. "Then both of you should have no problem looking at each other while you say that." Neither of them moved. The muffled sound of chairs scraping echoed from the ceremony hall as guests settled into their seats. Someone laughed outside the closed door, unaware that the wedding had already drifted somewhere unexpected. Ethan finally looked at Olivia. It lasted barely a second before he turned back to Claire. "We've known each other for years because of you," he said. "That's all there is." Olivia nodded too quickly. "Exactly." Claire walked past them and opened the bridal suite door. Warm lights spilled in from the hallway along with the soft notes of the quartet beginning the processional. Bridesmaids waiting outside looked up with practiced smiles that slowly faded when Claire remained standing in the doorway instead of stepping into line. "Give us another minute," she said gently. They exchanged uncertain glances before retreating down the corridor. Claire closed the door again. The latch clicked with quiet finality. She crossed the room, reached for the small velvet ring box resting beside the bouquet, and placed it into Ethan's hand. "Open it." He frowned but obeyed. The diamond reflected tiny sparks of light across the ceiling. "Put it on my finger again," Claire said. Ethan smiled awkwardly, trying to recover the easy rhythm the day had lost. "Claire, Do it. He slid the ring onto her finger. His movements were careful, almost ceremonial, but slower than they had been the night he proposed. Claire held out her hand toward Olivia. Now tell me which finger he always reaches for first. Olivia stared at the ring. The room filled with the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant melody of a violin drifting through the walls. I don't know, she answered. Of course you don't. Claire removed the ring herself and closed the box with a soft snap. Because you weren't paying attention just now. She slipped the box into Ethan's breast pocket instead. You were paying attention to whether I believed you. Ethan took one slow step forward. What are you trying to prove? Claire met his eyes for the first time since he had spoken Olivia's name. I'm watching how the two of you behave when neither of you knows what I'll do next. Another knock came, firmer this time. Claire. The wedding coordinator called through the door. We have to begin now or we'll lose our ceremony window. Claire walked to the door, but did not open it. Her fingertips rested against the cool brass handle. She looked back at Ethan, then at Olivia. Tell everyone the ceremony is delayed 15 minutes. The coordinator hesitated outside. Is everything okay? Claire never took her eyes off the two people standing in front of her. No, she answered. And until I decide whether this wedding still exists, nobody walks down that aisle. The wedding coordinator's footsteps faded down the hallway, replaced by the low murmur of confused guests filtering through the heavy wooden doors. Somewhere beyond the chapel walls, a coffee cup clinked against a saucer, and the quartet stopped playing in the middle of a phrase. The silence that followed seemed louder than the music itself. Claire slowly crossed the bridal suite, slipped off her satin heels, and placed them neatly beneath the vanity. Her bare feet settled against the cool marble floor. She looked smaller without the extra inches, yet every movement became steadier. Ethan watched her in disbelief. Claire, people are waiting for us. She picked up her phone from the dressing table, where it had been charging beside a compact mirror and a tube of lipstick. The screen lit her face with a pale blue glow. She unlocked it, opened the photo gallery, and began swiping without speaking. Olivia shifted her weight toward the door. I should give you two some space. No. Claire answered without looking up. Stay. Olivia stopped. Claire turned the phone toward them. The first picture showed the three of them 6 months earlier at a baseball game. Ethan stood between the two women with an arm around each of them. Everyone was laughing. Claire swiped again. A Christmas party. Another swipe. A charity dinner. Another. A weekend barbecue. In every photograph, Ethan and Olivia happened to stand beside one another before Claire joined them. Ethan exhaled impatiently. They're just pictures. Claire nodded. Exactly. Her thumb moved across the screen again. I never noticed because I was always looking at myself. She zoomed into one image taken outside a downtown cafe. Ethan was reaching for a paper bag of pastries while Olivia, half hidden behind him, had already stepped aside before he turned. Their movements fit together so naturally they looked rehearsed. Claire lowered the phone. Not secrets. Habits. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. You're reading into everything. Claire walked toward the garment rack, where Ethan's overcoat hung beside her father's suit jacket. She reached into one pocket and pulled out a folded list of ceremony notes the wedding planner had printed that morning. She unfolded it, then crossed Ethan's name off the rehearsal schedule with a black eyeliner pencil from her makeup bag. The waxy line cut through the page with a faint scratch. Ethan stared at her. What are you doing? Changing today's schedule. Olivia stepped forward. Claire, please. You're exhausted. We've been planning this wedding for over a year. Claire folded the paper again and placed it on the vanity. You're right. A year. She walked to the window, overlooking the courtyard where guests waited beneath white tents. Children chased one another across the stone path, while photographers adjusted tripods in the bright afternoon sun, unaware the ceremony had frozen in place. Claire rested one hand against the cool glass. For a year, I believed I knew what certainty looked like. She turned back. Today I learned certainty can be as simple as someone recognizing another person's touch without seeing their face. Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped. Olivia looked at the floor. Neither interrupted. Claire slipped her engagement ring off once more and held it between two fingers. The diamonds scattered tiny points of light across the ceiling. She walked toward Ethan, pressed the ring gently into his palm, and closed his fingers around it herself. I'm not wearing this again until I know why your hand remembered hers before it remembered mine. Ethan's fist remained closed around the ring. Claire reached for the bridal suite door and pulled it open. Cold air from the hallway flowed into the room. She looked directly at both of them. The ceremony is canceled until one of you decides to tell me the truth first. : Writing. Edit. Claire stepped into the hallway. Before either of them could answer, the cool air carried the scent of fresh coffee, polished wood, and white roses from the chapel entrance. Guests stood in small circles beneath crystal chandeliers, their conversations fading one by one as they noticed the bride walking alone without her bouquet, without her fiancé, and without the smile they had expected to photograph. The wedding coordinator hurried toward her, clutching a leather clipboard against her navy blazer. Claire, everyone is asking what happened. Claire removed the flower pin from her wrist corsage and placed it gently on the clipboard. Tell them lunch will be served early. Nobody leaves. The coordinator blinked, but nodded. Within seconds, servers redirected guests toward the reception hall, silver lids lifting from warming trays as the aroma of roasted chicken, garlic butter, and fresh bread slowly replaced the anticipation of the ceremony. Claire watched the room reorganize itself around her decision. Nobody argued. She turned and walked toward a quiet lounge beside the chapel library, where tall windows filled the room with soft afternoon light. A fireplace stood cold beneath a framed landscape painting, and leather chairs surrounded a walnut coffee table. She placed 3 glasses of water on the table herself from a nearby crystal pitcher, then opened the double doors. Ethan, Olivia, come in. They followed without speaking. Claire closed the doors behind them. The muted sounds of dishes and distant conversation disappeared, leaving only the gentle hum of the ventilation system. She pointed toward 2 chairs facing each other. Sit. Ethan lowered himself first. Olivia chose the opposite chair, leaving Claire standing between them. She did not pace. She did not accuse. Instead, she removed her phone once again and placed it face down on the table beside the untouched glasses of water. I'm done asking what happened, she said quietly. Now I want to see what happens when neither of you knows what I'm thinking. Ethan leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. Claire, I love you. She raised one finger before he could continue. Not yet. The room fell silent again. Claire walked behind Ethan's chair and rested one hand lightly on its polished wooden frame. Look at Olivia. Ethan obeyed. Now tell her that after today you'll never speak to her again if that's what it takes for this wedding to happen. Olivia's head snapped toward him. Ethan's lips parted, then closed. The clock above the fireplace ticked once, twice, 3 times. Claire slowly walked around the table until she stood behind Olivia. Your turn. Olivia swallowed. Tell Ethan you'll block his number today, delete every message you've ever exchanged with him, and never see him again outside a room where I'm standing. Olivia looked at Ethan instead of answering. Ethan looked back. Neither noticed Claire anymore. The silence between them stretched long enough for the ice cubes inside one untouched glass to crack with a sharp click. Claire reached across the table and quietly slid both glasses away before either of them touched them. Thank you, she said. Ethan looked confused. For what? Claire folded her hands together. Neither of you refused because the request was unreasonable. She looked from one face to the other. You refused because the idea of losing each other hurt more than losing my trust. Ethan stood so quickly his chair scraped across the hardwood floor. That's not true. Olivia stood almost at the same moment. Claire, stop turning this into something it isn't. Claire remained perfectly still. Then prove me wrong. She picked up her phone, unlocked it, and held it toward Ethan. Call Olivia right now. Ethan frowned. She's standing right here. Claire's thumb hovered over the screen before she slowly lowered the phone again. Exactly, she whispered. And yet neither of you reached for me first. Edit. Ethan's denial hung in the room like a note that refused to fade. The grandfather clock above the fireplace marked another minute with a deep wooden click, while sunlight shifted slowly across the walnut table, warming the untouched glasses of water. Claire picked up one of the glasses, took a single sip, then set it back down with quiet precision. We're done arguing, she said. Now we're going to do something simpler. Ethan rubbed both hands across his face before dropping them to his sides. Claire, enough. She ignored him and walked toward the lounge door. Opening it halfway, she caught the attention of the wedding coordinator waiting anxiously in the hallway. Could you bring me 3 blindfolds from the bridal party games? The coordinator hesitated only a moment before hurrying away. Within a minute, she returned carrying 3 black satin ribbons folded neatly in her hands. Claire thanked her, closed the door again, and laid the ribbons across the table. The soft fabric reflected the afternoon light with a faint sheen. Olivia stared at them without speaking. Ethan let out a tired laugh. "You're seriously doing this again?" Claire picked up one ribbon and offered it to him. "No. This time there are no guests. No applause. No pressure to entertain anyone." She handed another ribbon to Olivia and kept the last one herself. "This isn't a game anymore." Neither moved. Claire tied her own ribbon around her wrist instead of her eyes, then reached for Ethan's hand. "Stand here." He obeyed after a long pause. She guided him to the center of the room where the thick Persian rug softened every footstep. Olivia remained near the fireplace, her breathing almost inaudible except for the faint rise and fall of the satin against her shoulders. Claire walked behind Ethan and tied the black ribbon gently across his eyes. The knot rested neatly behind his head. "Don't speak," she said. "Don't guess. Just wait." She crossed the room, took Olivia by the hand, and silently led her to Ethan's left side. Then, without warning, Claire released Olivia's hand and stepped into the exact place where Olivia had been standing. She said nothing. The room held only the distant murmur of guests eating lunch beyond the walls and the quiet hiss of conditioned air flowing through the ceiling vents. Ethan waited several seconds. Then his right hand lifted. It moved toward Claire with hesitation. His fingers hovered inches away before drifting sideways. They stopped exactly where Olivia now stood. His hand found her sleeve first, then instinctively slid down until his fingertips reached her wrist. He froze. Before either woman spoke, Ethan whispered a single word. "Liv." The nickname escaped so naturally it seemed to arrive before thought itself. Claire stepped backward. The movement made the satin of her gown whisper across the rug. Ethan ripped the blindfold away. The color drained from his face as he realized Claire had not been standing where his hand had reached. Olivia pulled her wrist back immediately, pressing it against her side. No one spoke. Claire bent down, picked the black ribbon off the floor where Ethan had dropped it, folded it carefully, and placed it back onto the table. Every motion was calm, every fold perfectly straight. She looked directly into Ethan's eyes. "You didn't recognize her because of a scar." Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came. Claire nodded once, almost gently. "You recognized her because your body already knew where to find her." She reached for the engagement ring still resting inside Ethan's closed hand, but instead of taking it, she slowly closed his fingers around it again. "Now," she said, "it's finally your turn to explain why." Ethan's fingers tightened around the engagement ring until the edges of the velvet box creased beneath his grip. The afternoon sun had shifted lower, casting long bands of amber light across the hardwood floor while the air conditioner hummed steadily overhead. Olivia remained motionless beside the fireplace, her wrist still pressed against her dress, where Ethan's hand had found it without hesitation. The silence lasted long enough for voices outside the lounge to rise and fall again as guests continued eating lunch, unaware that the wedding had already begun to unravel. Ethan finally drew a slow breath. "Claire, before we started dating, Olivia and I went out a few times." The words landed softly, almost politely, but neither woman moved. "It wasn't serious," he continued. 3 dates. Maybe 4. We kissed. Then we both agreed it wasn't right, and we ended it before you and I ever met." Olivia lowered her eyes to the floor. The satin ribbon Ethan had dropped remained folded neatly on the table beside the untouched water glasses. Claire reached for one glass and turned it slowly between her palms, watching tiny drops of condensation slide over the crystal. "And neither of you thought I deserved to know." Ethan stepped forward. "It was over long before us. We didn't want something meaningless to damage your friendship." Olivia nodded almost immediately. "We promised each other we'd leave it in the past." Claire looked from one to the other. "You made that promise together." Neither answered. She set the glass down with a soft click. "Not with me." Ethan's shoulders sagged. "I should have told you." Olivia finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to so many times." Claire's gaze settled on her oldest friend. "But every time you stood beside me as my maid of honor, every time you helped me choose flowers, every fitting, every rehearsal, every toast." She paused, smoothing one wrinkle from the front of her wedding gown with the flat of her hand. You both decided silence was easier than honesty. Olivia closed the distance between them by one cautious step. Claire, I never wanted him back. Claire raised her hand before Olivia could come any closer. The gesture was gentle, but unmistakable. Olivia stopped immediately. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket, removed the velvet ring box, and held it out. I love you. I chose you. Claire did not look at the ring. You chose me after deciding together what I wasn't allowed to know. The words were quiet enough that Ethan lowered his hand without realizing it. Claire walked to the lounge door and opened it. The scent of fresh bread and brewed coffee drifted inside from the reception hall, followed by the faint clatter of silverware. Several relatives looked toward the open doorway before quickly pretending not to watch. Claire stepped into the hallway. Ethan followed instinctively, with Olivia a few feet behind him. The three of them emerged into full view of both families waiting near the chapel entrance. Conversation stopped. A photographer slowly lowered his camera. Claire turned to face them where everyone could see. She reached into Ethan's open hand, took the engagement ring at last, and held it between two fingers. The diamond caught the afternoon light one final time. Without raising her voice, she placed the ring back into Ethan's palm instead of onto her own finger. I believe you when you say it ended before we met, she said. But I also believe that trust ends the moment two people decide my life should be built on a secret they share instead of the truth I deserve. Every face in the hallway remained fixed on the three of them. Claire looked first at Ethan, then at Olivia. Now everyone deserves to know why this wedding isn't happening the way we planned. No one spoke after Claire's words. The reception hall, moments earlier alive with the clinking of silverware and quiet conversation, settled into an uneasy hush. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across white tablecloths, untouched slices of wedding cake, and rows of empty champagne flutes waiting for a celebration that no longer knew whether it would happen. Ethan stood motionless with the engagement ring resting in his open palm. Olivia remained a few feet behind him, her hands clasped so tightly that the satin ribbon around her wrist had begun to wrinkle. Claire stepped onto the small platform where the band had been preparing for the first dance. The polished wood reflected the hem of her ivory gown as she turned to face the guests. She did not reach for the microphone immediately. Instead, she lifted a hand toward the bandleader. He lowered his baton. The last note from the piano faded into silence. Only then did Claire pick up the microphone. Its cool metal caught the light as she held it steadily. Thank you all for being here today, she began. Her voice carried through the speakers without trembling. Heads lifted across the room. Parents stopped whispering. Cameras remained lowered. Some of you traveled across the country to celebrate with us. You deserve to know why we're not walking into the chapel. Ethan took one slow step toward the stage. Claire, please. She looked at him, then gently raised her free hand, asking him to stay where he was. He obeyed. This morning, she continued, I watched the man I was about to marry recognize my best friend while he couldn't even see her face. I asked questions. I gave both of them every chance to tell me the truth. The room stayed perfectly still. Even the kitchen doors at the back of the hall stopped swinging as the catering staff quietly paused their work. Claire lowered the microphone for a moment and looked directly at Olivia. Olivia's eyes glistened beneath the ballroom lights, but she never tried to interrupt. Claire raised the microphone again. They eventually admitted they had dated before Ethan and I met. They decided together that I never needed to know. A soft murmur rippled through the room before disappearing almost immediately. Claire did not wait for it to grow. I'm not ending today because they once went on a few dates. I'm ending today because the foundation of a marriage cannot begin with a truth that had to be forced into the light. Ethan climbed onto the edge of the platform. The wood creaked beneath his shoes. He stopped several feet away, careful not to reach for her. Claire, he said quietly enough that only those closest could hear. I'll spend the rest of my life earning your trust back if you'll let me. Claire looked at the ring still resting in his hand. Sunlight from the tall windows flashed across the diamond, scattering tiny reflections onto the polished floor between them. She slowly removed the bridal veil from her hair. One pearl pin after another slid free until the sheer fabric settled into her hands. She folded it carefully, walked to the nearest chair, and laid it across the seat instead of wearing it again. Then she turned back to Ethan. A wedding isn't a reward for promises about tomorrow, she said. It's a celebration of trust that already exists today. She stepped down from the platform, walked past Ethan without touching him, and stopped beside the chapel doors that remained open to the empty aisle lined with white roses. The petals stirred gently beneath the cool breeze flowing through the entrance. Claire rested one hand on the brass handle, looked back at everyone gathered inside, and made the only decision that still belonged entirely to her. There won't be a ceremony today. I'm calling off this wedding. Edit 6 months later, the first snow of the season melted into tiny streams along the sidewalks outside a neighborhood coffee shop, where the windows glowed amber against the gray afternoon. Inside, the air smelled of fresh espresso, cinnamon, and warm bread. Claire Bennett sat by the front window wearing a cream-colored sweater instead of a wedding gown, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug that warmed her fingertips. The gold band she had once imagined wearing every day was gone, leaving only a faint pale line that had almost disappeared. She watched people hurry past beneath umbrellas, then opened her laptop and smiled quietly as a message appeared confirming that the deposit from the canceled wedding had been refunded to every guest who had contributed to the celebration. She closed the screen without hesitation. Across town, Ethan Walker stood alone outside the small apartment he had rented after moving out of the home he and Claire had planned to share. The velvet ring box remained in the inside pocket of his winter coat, unopened. He removed it once, looked at the diamond catching the cold afternoon light, then slipped it back into his pocket before walking away. There was no audience now, no explanation left to give, only the steady rhythm of his own footsteps on the damp pavement. Olivia Hayes had written Claire more than once. Each letter arrived in a plain envelope with no return address, each one carefully handwritten. Claire read every page at her kitchen table where morning sunlight spilled across the wood grain, then folded each letter again and placed it inside a small box without replying. Forgiveness and reconciliation were not always the same thing. Some friendships ended quietly, not because every memory had become false, but because trust had stopped recognizing the person who carried it. On a bright Saturday in early spring, Claire attended another wedding, this time as an ordinary guest seated halfway down the aisle. White flowers lined the chapel once again, and soft piano music drifted beneath the stained glass windows. When the bride reached the altar, she paused, smiled at the groom, and took his hand. Claire watched the simple gesture without flinching. She noticed how naturally they looked at each other, how nothing seemed hidden between them, how neither carried the weight of an unanswered question. She applauded with everyone else as they exchanged vows. The sound filled the chapel, clear and uncomplicated. Walking back to her car beneath the mild afternoon sun, Claire removed a folded invitation from her purse. It was the only remaining invitation from the wedding that had never happened. She looked at the elegant calligraphy for a long moment, then tore it carefully down the middle. The paper separated with a soft, clean sound before she placed both pieces into a nearby recycling bin. She did not rush. She did not look back. Her phone vibrated once. Ethan's name appeared on the screen, followed by a single message. "I am truly sorry." Claire read every word, locked the screen, and slipped the phone into her coat pocket without answering. The breeze carried the scent of blooming dogwood trees through the parking lot as she lifted her face toward the clear blue sky and continued walking. The wedding ended the moment a blindfolded hand revealed a truth that words had hidden, but Claire's future began the moment she chose to trust herself more than the promises of the man she almost married, : Writing.